Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nada Al-Hawel, and I'm a private sector specialist at BMI KSA chapter, and I'll be your host for today. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker for today, Ms. Farheen Said. She is a business system analyst at Saudi Aramco, who's going to talk about effective communication for leadership. Ms. Farheen has a bachelor's degree in computer science from Bangalore University. She has over 20 years of experience in the oil industry using business knowledge, technical and project management skills to provide strategic solutions and creative insights to critical business problems. She is also a public speaking champion and a keynote master of ceremony at large events across the kingdom and abroad. If you have any questions regarding our topic for today, we will have time to answer them at the end of this webinar. Now, without further ado, allow me to welcome Ms. Farheen Said.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Nada. That was really kind of you. Greetings, dear leaders and future leaders. Are we ready for today's webinar? I'm assuming that is a yes, so I'm going to go straight ahead and start off. Our topic for today's webinar is effective communication for leadership. And the objective of my session today is to help you focus on enhancing the very critical communication skills, which should help you become great leaders. You are leaders and you want to become better leaders. So I'm going to help you learn some great strategies that you can implement to take your communication skills to a higher level. So let's get started. The basis of today's webinar, I'm going to start off by setting the stage with a really important quote. What I'm going to read to you was said by American author and presidential speechwriter James Hume. He said, "The art of communication is the language of leadership." Deep thought. And that clearly proves that communication and leadership are inextricably linked. Now, to me, the leader who lacks communication skills will quickly run into trouble because he or she hasn't taken enough measures to improve and learn how to communicate. A leader is full of ideas. And if they're not good at communicating those ideas, and expecting their team to do what they want to do, then it's going to be hard because what the leader is doing is sending out signals through their communication and expecting their team or their colleagues or anyone they're communicating with to deliver what they're expecting them to deliver. How does that happen? Let's take a look. So on the agenda tonight, are some important things to reach our objective. Now that we've established the clear connection between communication and leadership, let's look at what the agenda is structured around. I'm going to start off by, of course, defining for you what communication is. You might have different ideas, so we're going to clarify. We're going to go straight into what communication means for leaders in particular, because that's what we're after. Then we're going to talk about what great leaders do. I think most of us know what great leaders do, but we're going to actually list those things and recap. We're also going to be talking about the different forms of communication. And finally, I'm going to give out some really precious gems, important communication strategies that you as leaders can take and run with. So now that we know what's on the agenda, let's begin. What really is communication? When I give out these workshops or these speeches in a physical room, then I help people come up with their own answers. But since this is a webinar, I'm assuming you're all thinking about communication already. So the dictionary definition of communication is nothing but the process of sending and receiving messages through verbal or non-verbal means. Now, like I said, this is only a dictionary definition, but I think it's incomplete. Yes, I agree. There is exchange of information, which is essential. Yes, I also agree that it could happen in both verbal and non-verbal means, but there's more to communication than just that. Based on my own research, communication is a Latin word. It means share. We already know they're sharing. But this sharing of information, now in our case, we're talking about communication for leaders. So sharing of information by leaders or by those in authority, they are aiming to get a message to be received just the way they intended it to be. Am I making sense? Think about it. As a leader, you're designing your communication, you're designing your message to go out a certain way. You said what you wanted to say. But how can you, as a leader, ensure that this message is also received at the other end in the same way that it went out? I am aiming as a leader not to be misinterpreting that message. That's where good communication plays a role. That's where good communication enhances leadership. So now we're going to go into communication for leaders. Why communication for leaders? Yes, for everybody, but for leaders, because it has been established that communication is at the core of effective leadership. It's already been established. There's no two ways about it. So it only goes to say, if you are a great leader, you have some exceptional communication skills. If you don't, then you should be working on them. This is an important characteristic and it cannot be ignored. No, there's no choice for ignoring this. The next thing is that effective communication is a key characteristic of a good leader. So it's not just about being able to communicate. We all can communicate as humans, but our effective communication is going to be an important characteristic of us being a good leader. Why? Because you may have a leadership title or you have tremendous leadership potential, but that alone doesn't give you leadership presence. It really depends. Your leadership depends on how others are evaluating you. Now, being perceived as a leader is the essence of leadership presence, right? So you want to be able to make sure that people perceive you as a good leader. And in that, your communication definitely plays a role. To me, communication is definitely more than just exchanging information. It's not just exchanging information. Exchanging of information can happen by a newsreader. Newsreader sits down there and throws information at you. Is that enough to be a leader? Not really. As a leader, you're expected to do more than that. And during this webinar, you're going to see all of that. Finally, as a leader, you will communicate with a variety of audience. Now, having the ability to tailor your message just the way you want to deliver it based on your audience is a skill. This is a skill that will define you as a leader, will define your presence, and also help you build trust among your subordinates. This is important. That's why communication for leaders is a topic by itself, and it's really essential. Now let's see what specific requirements do leaders have. Let's explore how vast and varied these requirements are. To begin with, what would you be actually communicating? A strategy, a high-level company goal, pieces of information that you need to send out to your employees, maybe, news, good or bad. Look at the different kinds of communication that you would have to do. As a leader, you will be facing different challenges, and one of them is the kind of communication that you have. Now, how would you normally communicate as a leader? Most of the time, before year 2020, leaders normally communicated in person. So board meetings, company update meetings, different kind of meetings where people come together in one room and the leader stands up and communicates. The leader could also be communicating over the telephone. They could be weekly morning calls. They could be different kind of calls where he or she is expected to talk and communicate over the telephone or by email. Now, email is also a form of communication. You might not be talking or you might not be visible, but you're sending that message across in words. And sometimes that is so important because people tend to get the wrong message when the writing is not appropriate. Apart from that, as of today, the new normal is online platforms. Just like you and I are here in this webinar, sharing information with each other, trying to help each other become better leaders on an online platform. So leaders would definitely be using online platforms for communication. Now, who do leaders typically communicate with? With leaders, with peers, with their employees, with business partners, with vendors, with third-party companies, variety of people, right? You will be communicating with people in all levels of employment. So that is again a requirement. And when do leaders normally communicate? I would have loved to hear answers, but I would say, when do leaders not communicate? Because they're communicating all the time, every day, monthly sometimes, quarterly, and ad hoc. They really have to be prepared to be called on to communicate at any point of time. They don't get a lot of preparation time, or they do not get to sit down and think about how they're going to communicate because they're just called. What if there is a disaster in the company and you're required to go face the press? As a leader, you have to be prepared. So we see very clearly that these communication requirements for a leader are really, really varied. They're vast. Everybody communicates differently, but we see that the broad requirements for leaders is actually too broad for us to understand. So basically what you're saying is not one communication style works. It has to be tailored. But we say that everything is hard for leaders. So is communication. I would say not necessarily. Once you've mastered it, it becomes second nature. Then it's going to be easy for you to communicate and you're going to say, oh, I do it easily. I don't even think about it twice. So let's move on. As a leader, you really, really care about your impression, the impression you make. And the fact remains that this impression is made in the first few seconds of any interaction. To be very specific, it literally takes 7 seconds for people to get the first impression. Think about yourselves. How do we tend to judge people? When we meet people for the first time, we look at how they're dressed. We look at the way they greet us. We probably look at their facial expressions. And then quickly we make this image in our mind that tends to stick around, right? We're all like that. All human beings do that. Now, for better or worse, that image sticks in our minds most of the time. So, what about meeting someone for the first time, a leader in particular, and you're greeted with a warm handshake, a smile, upright posture? Don't you immediately think, wow, this leader is trustworthy? You haven't seen what he's done yet, but you already have this first impression in mind. So being conscious of how we're perceived is a part of our communication skill too. We definitely need to make sure we make that great first impression when we talk to people or when we even meet first people. Now, there is 2 ways you can communicate, either poor communication or effective communication. What happens when there's poor communication? According to a report from the Economic Intelligence Unit, poor communication can lead to a number of things that you don't really want. Number of effects that no leader looks forward to. What are those? Low morale. Is it surprising that employees who work for a leader have extremely low morale because there's poor communication? Something else is missed goals. Missed goals can have a snowball effect. So missed goals at a lower level go all the way up to the top, resulting in decreased performance. So someone who's not able to get what their leader is talking about is going to exhibit a drop in performance. And with all of this, ultimately what happens? Completely failed plans. It's not surprising that inadequate communication can cost large companies an average of about $642 million per year, while smaller organizations have a risk of losing about $420,000. Huge numbers, right? I'm sure nobody wants to lose this amount just because their communication skills are not polished. Now, this is the dark side. Let's look at the brighter side. What about effective communication? What if a leader is really good at communicating? Then what happens? It definitely affects more than the bottom line. For leaders, if they are good at communicating, it enables them to rally their team around shared vision. Think of it. The vision that a leader has and the leader wants to lead the company with is shared. Everyone in the company shares that vision only because the leader shared it with the rest of the employees in a great communication manner. What else? Empowered employees. So employees who feel wanted, who feel heard, are empowered to run the extra mile with their leaders. That ultimately leads to higher trust. Yes, trust, because they trust the leader who's leading them. And ultimately, what happens? Because there is shared vision, empowered employees who trust their leader, they successfully navigate organizational change, and they have very successful organizations. So this is the effect of effective communication. Now we get to choose how we want to run our organizations and what we aim for. I'm sure we all can recall a manager or a boss. Just think about a time when we worked for someone who was very well-meaning. They were really eager to help us and to help the organization succeed, but they failed. Why did they fail? Because they were not able to communicate their requirements. They were not able to talk clearly about their plans, and they were not open to receiving feedback. Now, if you were in such a position, I'm sure you can think back and remember the frustration. If you were not, and you were lucky to have a leader who was good at communicating, just imagine this scenario. What would typically happen? The leader will know that his instructions were sent out. But the leader also knows that his task was not completed the way he wanted it to be. What was he expecting from his employee? The employee is confused, doesn't know what to do, but there's no open communication. There's no room to go back and ask questions or clarify doubts. So the frustrated employee has low morale, doesn't know how to get something done. In turn, the leader is frustrated because he's not seeing the results that he wanted, right? He talked about them, but he wasn't clear. Now, this disappointment could continue because the employee is delivering something completely different from what the leader had in mind. That leads to the leader blaming his employee, probably giving the employee a very low evaluation, despite the best efforts that the employee puts in. The employee now loses interest, grows tired quickly. The boss, in turn, is angry, dissatisfied. This vicious cycle just continues. Now, everyone's tired. Who's to blame? Do you think it was the employee's mistake? Or was it the leader's mistake? It wasn't anybody's mistake. It was the low communication or the weak communication that the leader had that resulted in something that he didn't realize. So we see how important that effective communication is to get things going. Let's now look at what great leaders do. The word leader, it's an important thing, right? It depicts an important entity. Leaders are tasked with multitude of responsibilities. They have their minds full. Sometimes I just look up at the leaders and wonder, how do they get everything done? Now, a leader is not only someone who runs a business. A lot of times when we hear the word CEO or president of a company, I'm talking about the highest level of leadership in an organization, we tend to think, oh, they have to run the business, they have to make business plans, they have to set goals. No, it's not just that. They do. Yes, they do have that responsibility. But they also have this added responsibility to inspire positive incremental change. They have the responsibility to motivate and empower those around them. And they also have the responsibility to lead people to common objectives. Do you see how much they have to do? Now, the good thing is that a leader's most powerful tool for inspiring, motivating, and leading is, any guesses? I wish I could take those guesses. But yes, it is communication. It's that one singular tool that a leader can use to do all of these things, right? So effective communication is vital to gain trust, to align efforts, to make sure goals are met, to inspire positive change among your people. So when communication is lacking, important information can get lost. What happens? We just heard, or we just imagined that scenario where relationships suffer. And when relationships suffer, there's a barrier that is created. Now, this barrier is going to hinder progress. It's going to prevent a leader from being his best and bringing out the best in the people around you. So if there is a great skill that a leader must not omit, must not ignore, I think it's definitely communication. Now, let's sit back and recall my first slide. I told you that the basis of my session today is going to be a quote that I read to all of you. For those of you who remember, wonderful. But if you, in case you've forgotten, let me repeat. Remember I told you about James Hume and what he said? He rightly said that the art of communication is the language of leadership. Yes, you told us it's the language of leadership and we don't know the language. Yeah, I can't just leave you wondering what that language is. I owe you an explanation. I owe you some details on this language. So that's exactly what I'm going to do now. So if you are all ready to learn this language, let's explore. Let's see what this language looks like. Now, when you as leaders start communicating, how do you want to see the audience? Do you want to see the audience like this? Confused, bored, unsure? Or would you rather see an audience like this? Engaged, interested, enthusiastic, ready to take action. I'm sure you all want to see an engaged audience who trusts you as a leader and is ready to run that extra mile with your plan. Your language has to have distinct characteristics then. You are a great leader. You need to polish off your language. So let's dive deep into each of the characteristics that you as a leader should use in your language. First one, aiming for clarity. When communicating with employees, or anybody for that matter, leaders must speak in specifics. You should clearly define the result of whatever. It could be a project, it could be a strategy, it could be an initiative. Be clear about what you want to achieve by the end of each milestone. Now, when you want to be heard, make sure that the messages that you're sending out are clear and understandable and very, very straightforward. Personally, I know some people who think that if they use big, flashy words or complicated terminology, then they're going to be a great leader. Come on, ask yourself this question. Do I want to impress or do I want to be heard? You've impressed people in the first look or the first time you've spoken to them. Now it's time for you to get them on board and be heard, be understood. And if that's what you want, you just need to toss out the flash and stick with clear messages. Leave no one guessing. Let everybody be very clear about what they understand from your message. Remember, specificity is definitely better than ambiguity. So learn to communicate with clarity. It is definitely a language of leaders. Now, another characteristic of the language of leaders is to paint a compelling picture. Now, when I say paint a compelling picture, what I mean is actually use your words, distinctly vivid words that paint a great picture in the minds of people. When I say a few words, immediately there is an image that pops in your mind, right? So if you manage to speak in a way that paints a great picture in the minds of your audience, then ideas come to life. It's almost like they're imagining what you're saying. So when it becomes vivid, it becomes real. And we all know that when there's a beautiful picture in our mind, it becomes easier for us to run with it. So as a leader, your language should be able to paint these vivid pictures in the minds of your audience to make your communication flawless. Passion. Passion is an essential part of the language of leaders. Energy is contagious. I know everybody would agree with me on that. So is passion. A leader who displays passion with conviction is generally more likely to get their message across clearly compared to someone who seems unconvinced. If I'm not convinced about something and I'm talking about it, it would show because I'm not passionate, I'm not excited. And because I'm not, the manner in which I exhibit that lack of passion, either through my nonverbal mode or even through my verbal communication, is going to be picked up. It gets picked up so quickly. And what happens? I'm completely losing my audience because I don't have the passion that a leader should have. Yes, a passionate leader comes across as someone who everybody wants to follow. Why would you want to follow someone who lacks passion? So exhibit that passion in your language. Use it in your communication. Simple and concise is definitely better than complicated and confusing. I'm sure everyone here would agree with me. If they had a chance to give their opinion, I don't think anybody would say no. Think about it, everybody. Time has never been a more precious commodity than it is today. Now, it is critical that leaders learn how to cut out that chase, hit the high point. For leaders, time is critical. They have a million other things to take care of. So they should expect the same from their audience. Without understanding the value of brevity, it is very unlikely that you will be afforded this opportunity to get to the people at that level where they will understand you. If you're not concise, you're going to lose your audience right away. Like right now, if I'm talking about communication skills, but then I bring in so many other things, I'm not concise in what I want to say, I know people will tune out. So your goal as a leader is to weed out all the superfluous extra fluff that you bring into your words and make every word that you say count. You're a leader. You're there to deliver a message. You're there to inspire people, to tell them what to do. So if you want to get there, you just want to make sure that your language is very concise. We've all been in talks where we sit down and we look at the leader and wonder, what is he trying to get at? Or what is she trying to say? When are they going to get to the main point? Don't you want that? Come on, we're here. We know you want to give us a message. Get straight there. Be concise in what you're saying. Now, all that extra fluff is only going to dilute a strong message. You don't want to make it, you don't want a 500, 600 word message to go out and be lost. You will seem like a terrible communicator. And then you might seem like a non-trustworthy leader. So make sure that your language is really concise, just saying what you want to say. Emotionally intelligent. Now, emotional intelligence is a whole topic by itself, and we'd probably need an entire webinar to talk about it. But because it's a key characteristic of the language of leaders, I'm going to touch on it briefly. Let's examine the best leaders in the world's greatest leaders. They were all exceptional communicators, right? They might talk about their ideas, but when they talk, they also speak to your emotions. They talk to your aspirations. Wouldn't you agree? They have realized that if their message doesn't take deep root with the audience, it won't be understood, much less championed. So being emotional intelligent is what? It's being self-aware. It's knowing how to control your emotions while dealing, especially with conflict resolution. Leaders are known to face a lot of challenges. How they react to them will definitely define them as a leader. How you're able to control those emotions, yet get your message across and show the people that you care for them. You want to show people that you understand their needs. That is emotional intelligence. And that brings me to my next characteristic, which is being empathetic. Great leaders have empathy. Definitely have empathy. Now, being empathetic means you're able to identify and understand emotions. You're able to imagine yourself in other shoes. Being empathetic simply shows your team that you care for them. Yes, you are an authority, you are a leader, but you're a human. And you have those feelings that are important for fellow human beings. Don't hide them. Show people that you're empathetic through your communication. Let's take this example. There was this manager who I knew, and he happened to be my friend's manager. She worked in this team, and he reacted very angrily one day when he found out that one of the employees in that team has been arriving to work late consistently, on and on. And when he found out that the reason was that his child was unwell, they had this medical condition that was really scary. What was the reaction of this manager? Anger? The entire team was so negative when they found out that the manager reacted negatively. Come on, we all have life outside of work, right? I know business comes first and we give it all we have and we are dedicated and we're committed and we make sure nothing comes in our way. If we could avoid it, we would avoid it. But think about how that employee felt. So if you were that manager, if you were that leader, you could have used your communication skills to show empathy. For example, you could have sat down the employee and said, let's agree on a plan of action. I totally understand how you feel. I know your child is suffering and it tears your heart to see them in that condition. But because business is important, can I help you to do something that is going to be mutually beneficial? For example, how about you start off work a little early so that you can go home early? Or maybe you can come in late when your child needs you most and then you finish off later. stay back for a little longer than everybody else. That is empathy. That is a true leader helping his employees and making them feel wanted. And that is definitely a language of a leader. Finally, any good leader definitely has action-oriented language. Why? Because the language of leaders cannot just be vague. You cannot just go up and tell your people, I am aiming to make a $300 million profit this year. Okay, how is that going to happen? Do you have plans in mind? Do you have specific actions? Are you going to clarify further? You have a great vision, Mr. Leader, but no specific actions. We're only employees. We can't think like you. What happens? The leader has this wonderful vision, but they're setting themselves and their organizations down for failure because you haven't been clear about the specific actions that you want your people to take. You are trying to inspire those around you to reach goals, but tell them how. Be specific about the actions. A leader who leads by example is always seen as trustworthy and dependable under all circumstances. So, ladies and gentlemen, your language as a leader would be enhanced and effective if it included all of these characteristics. Now that we know what our language is going to look like, let's look at what the different forms of communication are. There's only two forms of communication, verbal and nonverbal. Now, verbal is generally in a one-to-one setting. That is, you're using your words to communicate with people, and it could happen with two people sitting together, a leader and a co-leader, a leader and an employee, a leader and anybody, one-to-one. Or it could happen in a group setting where the leader is expected to come up and speak to a large group of people depending on the size of the organization. Now I'm going to expand further about verbal because that takes a lot of focus in my next slides. But in this slide, I'm just going to touch briefly on the two forms of communication. So the other one is nonverbal. And the nonverbal communication is anything that you communicate without saying a word. Are you wondering what's wrong with me? How can you say anything without saying a word? Well, there's something that is more important than words. Your body speaks. And your gestures, your facial expressions, your body language, it all speaks to an audience. And we will explore in our next slides how the other form of communication, which is nonverbal, also works. Now let's look at verbal communication. We already said verbal communication is through your words. What do you require in your verbal communication as a leader? How are you going to affect people around you? Firstly, clarity. Very clear words. Talking about what you want in clear and concise language is definitely the best way to communicate verbally. When there is no clarity, there is a loss of message. There is misinterpretation of the message, and that's not what you're aiming for. What about courtesy? Now, courtesy is something that we owe to everybody around us, whether it's employees, whether it's colleagues, whether it's family, whether it is your co-drivers on the highway, whether it's your co-passengers on a plane, or whether it is your co-shoppers in a supermarket. No matter who you're communicating with, you have to do it with courtesy. I don't think I need to tell you this, but just as a reminder, simple words like please and thank you go a long way for a leader. Someone who makes people know that they're important, speaks to them in a courteous manner, is definitely a great leader. The other thing or the other part of verbal communication is consistency, which is so important. When you're communicating verbally, consistency is important as a leader because you can't be saying two different things at two different times. You have to be consistent in your message. As a leader, if you say something today and say something completely different next week, people are going to be lost. They're going to wonder if this leader really knows what he's talking about. Is he clear about what he wants? So consistency, clarity, courtesy, and consistency. The 3 C's of verbal communication is something that all of us, especially leaders, need to be working on. Now, we talked about verbal communication. What about the nonverbal communication? Let me give you a surprise. Effective communication is only 7% of the words we say. Only 7%? Are you kidding me? Are you saying that all these great leaders who get their speeches written by the best people, they only have 7% of the words matter? That is a fact. It's only 7% of the words that really matter. Why? Because 38% is tone. Nonverbal communication, effective communication is 7% of the words we say, 38% the tone we use, 55% our body language. How many of you left the webinar already? You would if I talked in that fashion, right? So tone is so important. If I don't speak with the right tone, a lot of people are going to be so put off. That's why tone is important. Now, the major part is body language. 55%, can you believe it? We're saying all these things without even knowing we're saying it. So just with our mouth closed, we're standing there in front of an audience as a leader, and we're speaking without knowing that we're speaking. Wow. Do you realize that? I didn't for a really long time. So let's explore the body language and see why 55% of it is really body language. What makes up the body language? Gestures? Would you trust me if I sat like this with cross arms? My hand gestures are important. If I don't use my hands, I can still talk. But if I use them effectively without being overly distractive, then I'm sending out a message that I know what I'm talking about. Do you remember a leader who comes in, stands up tall, looks you straight, and has this great posture? Wow, you're already impressed with the personality. A great posture could define a great communicator. That's why it's important. What about eye contact? Although we're on this virtual platform, I'm still striving to make eye contact with everybody by looking at the camera. If my eye contact was distractive, if I looked away, if there's a speaker who actually looks down, then they're not going to have the same effect as someone who looks straight in the eye. Eye contact is especially vital during a one-to-one communication. But of course, even in a group setting, it is important. You want to be able to make the right eye contact, not too overly distractive or not to make anybody uncomfortable, but just enough. Facial expression. Leaders can be disappointed on days, they can be angry and frustrated, but they cannot come in and communicate with a frown on their face. A leader who's not smiling, a leader who looks like he's had a bad day, cannot be trusted as much as a leader who's there with enthusiasm and neutral facial expressions. So these things make up our body language, gestures, posture, eye contact, and facial expression. What about tone? Tone we just talked about. The right pitch, no shouting, and not being extremely soft. Just enough for people to understand you. The right pace. I can't be speaking so fast that no one can understand me. At the same time, I can't be so slow that people are going to be falling asleep. So using all of this helps you get to the right communication as a leader. Now, I left the best for the last. Like I told you, I'm going to give you some golden nuggets, some effective communication strategies, things that you can take and help yourself become a great communicator and definitely a great leader. So I'm going to give you some strategies that you're going to take away and become great leaders. Let's go into it. Knowing your audience. As a leader, we saw that you could have a variety of audience, different kinds of people, different kinds of minds, different level of knowledge, different understanding of things. So as a leader, can you just be consistent about your communication style? No, think about it. One day you could be communicating with other VPs in the company. On the other, you might be in a setup where you're talking to people who might not have the same language abilities as the ones before. For example, English might be an official language, but you cannot use it with the same words and the same style with people who might not be able to decipher what you're saying when your language is English. English is just an example. It could be different languages across the world, and people might not be comfortable with that. So you need to know your audience. You need to know what they're capable of understanding, their level, so that you as a leader go in ready to speak to your audience depending on what level they are at. Listen actively. It is so important for you to listen actively. How many of us actually listen? We don't really listen to people, even when we're talking to our own family or our friends. The minute the person in front starts speaking, we're already crafting our reply in our minds. Have we got the patience and the ability to listen actively? For a leader, it's especially important. When a leader shows that he's listening actively, the people feel wanted, the people feel heard. You could be asking open-ended questions like, what do you think? How do you think we could improve this? Where do you think we went wrong? So listening actively is a strategy that you can never fail with as a leader. To be able to listen to those around you, because communication is definitely not one-sided. A lot of leaders think, I'm a great communicator, I go up on stage and I speak clearly and people understand me and they think I'm a great leader. Yes, but there is a second part to communication. It's listening, which most of us miss. We tend to think we've spoken and that's it. No, there's a reason why listening is a part of communication. And active listening in particular will define you as a leader. Getting to the point. Yes, you might have something to say, but say it in a way that you're not confusing people and you're going straight to what you want to get at. Now just imagine there is a 10% cut in health coverage for a company, and you as a leader have been given the task of going out and announcing this to the employees. You know it's not a pleasant thing to say. You have your emotions in control, you're ready to face the crowd, but you go up there and start off by saying, the strategy that we implemented the last quarter. Okay, what about the strategy? You were here to tell us about our health coverage, the decreased health coverage, and to justify it, and to tell your people that you empathize with them and you are there with them. So get to the point. Why beat around the bush? Go straight into what you want to say. That is an important communication strategy. Go straight to where you're going. Of course, you can't just go up and say one or two sentences and walk away. That's going to sound rude. But you want to get to what you want to say without fluffing it all up with other things. Avoiding jargon. A lot of the leaders have been through management courses, have been through management schools that teach them a lot of terms that are good for managers. Try not to use that on everybody, because jargon makes a message very difficult to understand for different kinds of people. Try and avoid it. Try and use simple words. You might have learned a complicated word and you want to use it, but not in your communication. It's not an effective communication strategy. If you want to keep it straightforward, if you want to keep it effective, then definitely avoid the jargon. Just keep it super simple, easy for people to understand and relate to. Body language. We just talked about it, right? Your body speaks, ladies and gentlemen. We don't realize, especially a leader is being watched and evaluated all the time. So even if you had the best thing to say, you have the best speech to give out, but your body language is somehow not so great, you're slouched, you're looking down, you're not so energetic, you probably haven't slept in the past 3 nights, but that is going to affect your image as a leader. Use that body language to show what you feel, show confidence, show commitment, show empathy. Empathy is definitely sent out by your eyes, a warm smile. Show people how much you care. It's easy once you've got the hang of it. Finally, one of the most important communication strategies is to seek feedback. You need to seek feedback from those around you. We seek feedback from people so that we can improve. And once we improve, we're helping them improve. We're helping the organization improve. What does seeking feedback mean to people? As a leader, if you just throw out your ideas and expect people to implement them, then you don't care about what they think. Seeking feedback is showing them that you really want to know what they feel. You really want to know how they want to take this further. And it's important. Some of the best ideas or some of the best feedback could come from any level of an organization, any level. The most innovative ideas, the most innovative way of doing things. As a leader, your mind might be so full that you're not able to think clearly about new ways of doing things. So open it out. Let people give you that feedback. And remember that failed case where the employee was not able to give feedback, was not able to approach the leader. Doors were closed. They practiced a closed door policy. As a leader, you're going to be perceived as really authoritative, very bossy, dominant, not willing to listen. That's not something you want. As a great leader, you want people to think of you as passionate, as caring, as empathetic, as seeking feedback. Seeking feedback is definitely going to help you improve and help the company improve. So I hope these effective communication strategies are going to help you as leaders, take you to the next level of leadership. I would like to leave you with some words of wisdom. These are words from Gerald R. Ford, who was the 30th President of the United States. In his own words, if I went back to college again, I'd concentrate on 2 areas: learning to write and to speak before an audience. Nothing in life, he said, is more important than the ability to communicate effectively. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is just one leader who talked about communicating effectively. If you went around and did some reading and research, you'd see that most leaders left us with these words of wisdom, left us with their words that said communication is so important for leadership. We cannot think of it as optional. It's definitely a great characteristic. We really want to be able to have great leaders who can communicate effectively and help lead organizations to success. We want those kind of leaders. We want to be those kind of leaders. So ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the end of my webinar. And I would like to tell you that if you wanted to improve your communication as a leader, there's several ways to do it. You could do it by practicing these strategies at home, at work, or joining different organizations that help you become a great communicator and ultimately a great leader. This brings me to the end of my webinar. I'll really be happy to take any questions that the audience might have. Can we have the host take over? I'm just going to go over the questions to see what. Okay, one of the attendees asks if business partners and suppliers are not the same. Well, they could be the same. My aim here was not to list suppliers could be different, business partners, very different from business partners, but they could also be similar or the same. So this is not really what I wanted to say. It was not differentiating them. It was really to show you that there were different kinds of people that you would be communicating with. So it could be the same, it could be different, really depends on the situation. Then I have another question that says, leaders should be coach, am I right? Well, I think what you were trying to say was leaders should be coaches, right? Well, not necessarily. Leaders are there to inspire and motivate us. They could coach us if they had the time, but remember how full a leader's plate is. He or she already has so much to do that they might not be able to be a coach. They might just be able to help you out with inspiration. But in the end, what they're doing is helping people get to where they want to get. So they might be a coach, but it's hard to expect leaders to be coaches. Another question I see is, do you think that body communication is not so important as before, since people have learned other types of communication as to be active listeners? No, I'm sorry, but I would have to disagree. Body definitely speaks. So body language is still one of the most important parts. And like I said, it's amazing. Even I found it difficult to believe that our body speaks even before our mouth is open. So yes, body language is definitely important. I also have one more question. Examples of jargons to avoid communication. Well, I could give you examples of jargon like, let's say, strategical influence on the company. I am a leader and I'm talking about operational excellence and strategical changes. If I went and spoke to operators in a plant, how do you think they're going to get that? That's jargon to them. What is strategy? What is operational excellence? What are all these fancy words that you're talking about? Instead, if I told them, let's improve the way we're doing our job. Let's improve it to the point that we're doing our best. That is operational excellence, right? But I'm breaking it down for someone like an operator who might not be able to understand these terms. So that is an example of jargon. I hope you understood that, Ziad. The next question I see, could you please highlight something regarding artifact communication, how we may use it more effectively? For example, WhatsApp application is used widely as communication technology. I'm not sure what you mean by artifact communication. Do you mean written communication? Do you mean via social networking? Because you've used WhatsApp, so I'm assuming you're talking about written communication. Well, I've seen cases where written communication is highly misinterpreted sometimes, because even the use of an emoji goes wrong, completely wrong sometimes. So the best thing would be to send it out in a voice note or even talk to the person face to face. Nothing can replace face-to-face communication, in my opinion. I think that is the most important. What else do we have? How to communicate with an autocratic leader? Well, you must be a leader already, but if they are someone who's trying to be dominant and they're not fixing their communication, then the only thing you can do is to maybe try and open up that communication channel between them and you. Try to write them a note, write them an email, or try and get an appointment with them to get your views across. Because like I said, as a leader, they should be seeking feedback. They should be actively listening. But if they're not doing it, then someone like you is going to be disappointed, and there's going to be more and more people who are going to be disappointed, and that's going to be difficult for the leader. So communicating with someone who is hard to communicate with is hard, right? Okay, I don't see any other questions. Someone says you're right. Okay, so those were the questions I see. Do we have anything else? Did I miss out on anything? Do we have our host or someone who can help me here? Okay, even in the chat, some people have put in some questions. Your presentation guided us towards 3 C's of communication. In a communication subject, I read there are 5 C's. Would you please elaborate? Absolutely, there are 5 C's and I agree. Now, these 3 C's were only for verbal communication, if you remember. What I touched on was only verbal communication. But yes, I could even say there are some authors who say there are 7 C's. So mine were concentrated 3 C's rather than diluted 5 or diluted 7. So it's really up to you how you want to take it. There's no fixed fundamental rule on how many C's there are. I tried to share with you what I believed in, but of course, each one could have, like I said, different authors, different speakers could say there are different C's of communication, and it really depends on if you think the 3 C's are not enough, explore further and go to the 5 or to the 7, or you never know, by tomorrow we might have 9 C's. So yeah, that is it. Sure, you're welcome. I think I've covered most of the topics and answered most of the questions. Do we have anything else? Okay, there's something here. Do you think structural silos can affect communication? Definitely, definitely. Silos bring barriers that affect communication. And I've seen that happen. When those silos are created, people tend to work separately, almost like they belong to different companies within the same company. There seems to be a sense of competition. There seems to be a barrier to communication, because then those silos make it more hard for both leaders and employees to unify their vision, to unify their goals. So yes, definitely, they could create communication barriers, and it's hard. Do we have anything else? Then how to do, okay, that's what I said. You have to break down those silos. You have to be able to, as a leader, you can't do it as an employee. As a leader, people need to bring people together and say, hey, look, you're working for the same company. We have a common vision. We're not competing against each other, right? So break down those silos and start working as one organization with a common goal. There can't be an overlap of functions, or if there is, then it's okay. So what? You're still working for the same organization, right? In the end, you're working for one company and there's one leader. So that it's the responsibility of that leader to break down those silos and make it easier for people to communicate. I hope that answered you. What else do we have? Does Agile can avoid this? Now that is a totally different topic. Agile project management and communication strategies is 2 different things. Yes, Agile is something that I can talk about, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into that area because it's a totally different topic. It's nothing to do with communication strategies. So let's keep Agile for maybe another day and another webinar. Someone is asking me, what is artificial intelligence? This webinar is about communication strategy for leaders, right? So artificial intelligence, again, maybe you can contact PMI KSA chapter and tell them that you need a webinar on artificial intelligence, and we will talk about it separately. there might be people who are experts in the subject and they could talk about it. So I will leave it to that. Although I know what artificial intelligence is, I'm not going to be talking about it because that's really not what my topic is about today, right? Yeah, that, I guess that is everything. Um, Mindset, yes, definitely a mindset is important. I know, but agile relies on communication. Yeah, it does. It does. Agile does. Agile is a way of managing projects. And like I said, agile is a topic by itself. So I'm not going to mix the two up. I'm going to leave that for the people who actually organize this to maybe come up with a webinar on agile if that's what the audience wants, right? That's really not related to what I spoke about. All right, so thank you very much. I hope this webinar was beneficial to everybody. And if the host is here, do you want to take over and end the session for me, Mohammed? You're very welcome. It was my pleasure to be talking at this webinar. Thank you, everyone who came today. Yes, why are people talking about agile and artificial intelligence? This is really not today's topic. Since I don't see, I don't see the host taking over. So I think I will just end this here. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great night. Goodbye.